The Darkness I See by Anon Y. Chapter 1. A Lifetime of Questions. Part 4. It's all a dream now. The double, triple, re-stippled notes of my father's end, all the non-linearity of temporal bondage unbound by what but years experienced, many a moment in between things called past and present. With our note written and pinned on and in the ground, all except for one truth remained open and to be understood. On my knees, I continued in drenched hot thought. In memory, through me, I remembered, again but finally full excitedly, that months earlier, my father had been able to squeeze one untrivial addition to this story of man before he was truly and finally underfoot. Though his constitution had lacked most of the bravery and forthright faith that underlies any greatness, my father had spoken one paramount truth into original existence at his end. He had repeated over and over at the sight of his last exhale one mantra. To be strong, he said, to be brave, he mumbled, it is of the best in us, not the best of us, the best in us. That sentence remained stuck in my mute voice's throat as I rethought how I had just carried him off and dropped him down, the two meanings of the moments before clashing as if they were more than differentiated by such a simple thing seeming as time. At the height of its potency, my father had cried out that one message. On that deathbed, at his personalized precipice of finally unjaded discovery, he had brooded over his youth, struck a deal with the memory of his vermouth, and smelted his pain into truth. He had felt the darkness opening beneath him as he cried out. His calling out of not the best of us, the best in us, sat balled up in my neck as I threw down my handfuls of dirt atop his casket. After my filthy by design, unwashed hands fruitfully turned more bothersome than poignant, I cleaned them in some strange corridor sink, or in some addition room. I washed and dried my hands until a note came to me, from my father back to me. Further reverse time immediately became relevant too as I grabbed the note. From atop his strange to post-mortem pedestal, as I secretly wished, my father had written me a letter. As always with life, more like a story than anything else, the message, just as my letter to him had been, was given quietly at his end. My mother had withheld it from me until the night after his death. No, at that sink, after the burial, in that room, black, no, in a room, dark. The letter remained unopened for months after his passing, until I had finally quelled my revulsion at his overdue revelations. The night that I burst open the letter's edge was the night I realized who I was. My father's son. It had taken me many nights before the dreary ripping of wrappage to muster myself together enough to endure our last communication. Most of my preliminary introspection was spent attempting to truly understand the nexus between all men, my father and I especially. Even as I flowed in and out of eurekas and remembrances, my theories of power, competence, truth, and justice remained as just words, falling flat against my impending reality, my father's written finality. I felt that way with most of my reviewed works of literature and learning, my unempirical accomplishments remaining subsumed by a special air of untruth. The flexibility of my favorite philosophical precepts was never going to align with the unrelenting variety of painful misdoings that had stained each moment of my life. That same life's during and after the note's unfolding were becoming the least of the problematic endured mania as my hands trembled from my past. There I was, sometime after his death, lying in my bed beside a picture of him, crying. He had been so cruel to me, but my heart still beat our signature muted glow. My timorously ticking tissue tapped from within me. I made a promise to myself, saying quietly, no amount of clarity or justice could rectify the disastrous wake of his psyche. I couldn't let some posthumous proclamation eradicate the truth of my father, the father I had grown slowly to hate, who had entrenched himself into my mind as the symbol of exactly my antithetical aspiration. His soul, trapped in the immodesty of grief and catastrophe, was unimpeachable from the consistent girth of my rumination-fueled mental travesty. I wondered at that moment, what could it say? My tear-soaked pillowcase was cold and wet against my cheek, stinking of my weakness. I couldn't stop spiraling in thought, my mind morphing into some malicious manipulator, like a siren to sailor. Through the nuances of my father's life, I searched for truth, my veil of hatred remaining largely unbroken. Nonetheless, I found the moment to be worthy of a deep examination of our time spent together. Through the mentally flashing tenebrosity of our shared life, I rifled. I found little splendor, my reminiscing conquest serving only to further my curiosity. I reached for the framed picture of my father atop my bedside table. As my hand departed from my side, a vision of a slowly decaying arm boomed in my mind. The strong and vital arm that was at my side quickly fell to shaking necrosis. The sight of my false flesh, drying and graying into death, meeting my father's finishing creth, ravished my cognition. The image came and went, but my emptiness compelled me through the unsure moment. I picked up the frame and smashed it on the ground beneath me, ousting the letter I had placed behind the picture. The gloss shattered. With this picture scraped and torn from the frame's broken gloss, and my cowardice subsiding, I gripped the top flap of the letter. Against the envelope's sticky, substance-saturated top, solid and strong from past freshness, I pulled hard. After my rather inhospitable rip had finished shivering through me, I smiled upon the unclean wreckage that remained of the letter's outer casing. I had broken the seal of sorrow, on which my sadness had subsisted for so long. For that, I ingratiated myself with a sweet sting grin. As I unfolded the letter, the paper seemed to glow with significance. It was viscerally saturated with his spirit. Written with the same stern rigidity of all his life, the letter's message layout immediately startled me. I looked down at the clean and organized patterns of his writing, and my smile faded. In truth, a small part of me had fooled myself into believing that the letter was going to be some miraculous turn in my father's post-life, some revolt against the mistakes he had made against me. Only me. What a fumbling fool I had been. I had really hoped that in some maddened stroke of pain-induced, prophetic, perhaps pathetic poetry, my father had called out to me from before beyond the paper, in love and admiration. What a childish hope it was, a dastardly hope. In the moment precisely after the letter casing's tear and before my first sighting of the writing itself, I had been blissfully blind. The robust plainness of my father's writing and the neat confinement of his words allowed for my heart to regain its shard-like, fragmentary sharpness. A torturable stranger I was once again to him, my father. The letter's message further solidified my hope's ephemeral reality. The letter read as follows. My boy, though we have had little in common throughout our lives, I wish nothing but for your continued life. Though falseness and cruelty will underline most of your life, you must not lose faith in the life that persists within all of it. You have a chance to be a better man than me. I have learned many things, many unthinkable truths that lose nothing to time. One man may never escape his own heart, his own conscience. Truth, pain, and justice will never leave us. They can never leave us. The streaming vitality that allies itself with life can never be broken. It will always find us. Your father, P. Kozlov. I laughed painfully, tears welling up with each rereading. His epitaph had been longer than his message to me. I screamed internally. His child. The child proven by time to yield all this fruitful achievement, to make something of greater consequence than his achievement. This is the message to him? Repeating life, repeating life, repeating life? His name is even Americanized.
Almost breaking my neck with a rapid look upwards, I yelled out,
"This is it? This is all I meant to you?"
I scrupulously searched for further meaning as I breathfully refilled my agonized alveoli. "Maybe there's more in the envelope," I begged. After excavating the envelope and finding nothing, I thought, maybe there's another letter I had forgotten about in the picture. After fumbling through the fractured frame and cutting my finger, I lay on the bed, ears ringing with unimaginable malice. I fell asleep quickly and quietly, crushed. I woke up the next morning in mourning of my hope, lost in the ineffable unacceptability of my circumstance. All that time, not reading his letter, I had thought the upper hand was mine. I had thought that, in some way, I wasn't granting his memory the satisfaction of redemption. I had imagined that all the things I had hoped he would have said to me all my life were in that letter, and that I was withholding his absolution. I had wanted so desperately for his entrapment. I thought that the unbroken seal was, in some grand way, imprisoning his conscience. With the letter read, understood, and memorized, I laughed at the false premise of my aspiration. Uncontrollably, upon my bed, I rolled around, crazed, writhing, and howling. My broken heart ailed me to no end. The wailing lasted hours, my wretched body trying anxiously to return to its slumber. Wakefulness remained constant, the only tangible constant. I held tightly onto the shrapnel of my disintegrating fondness as I rifled through what remained of my father in my memory's storehouse. I could have easily removed the last 3 positives that remained tangled between my memories and my father's purified consciousness. The triple destruction would have been such a perfect gifting to my vengeful spirit, a new batch of tainted loveliness to sour and devour. I wanted nothing more than to allow that spirit's disgusting gut, churning and mixing slovenly, to engulf his memory further. So much of me at that moment would have looked down upon that secondary death, that hellacious scene, with great ease. In my desperation, following the full self-elucidation of my own resentment's grandness, I scoured my soul, looking only for memories of goodness to satiate the emptiness that my father's lackluster letter had carved out. I found one beautiful and untouched memory. I arrived at the memory in a truly heated and disorganized frenzy, my crazed mind demanding release. There it was, the greatest good memory we shared. Behind my eyes, between my ears, and within my nose, I relived our closest moment. The remembrance was a depiction of me making my first proper pampushki donut. My eyes halted their fervent search for more, and my body froze comfortably. I was finally ready to end the torment of my elongated reflection. I rolled off the bed, stumbled back to my well-acquainted desk, and began writing. Whilst writing, an internal dialogue arose, some enigmatic voice narrating the scene. The voice was mine, but in another form, unrecognizable as my own to any objective observance. My retelling read as follows. It was the most stunning morning. School had been called off, and my parents' slow bakery glowed brilliantly with potential for fun, my little brain investigating all possible routes to help me flourish in my mischievousness. The tiny bakery's mid-morning crispness, and my glorious, pre-education inculcated away God's soothing sunlight, filled me with a certain hope and warmth that approximated heavenly love. The sun shot rays of spectacular splendor through the cheap plastic front curtains as dissipated plumes of flour danced in and out of their spotlights. The warm calmness of the silent sun was harshly disjointed once every 5 rotations of the old dough-kneading machine. On the mark of its main drive gear's bent tooth, the machine loudly and sparse repeatedly clanked against the minor attached gears. Anna Polovina, the baker, and my father's third cousin, bellowed out as the 7th or so knock boomed through the timid silence, saying in broken English, "Hey, this need oil." Once the discordant clanking became rhythmic and fell from attention, the bliss of my ear's peace returned. The soft sound of dense dough stretching, the slight aroma of sweet bread rising, the glistening delectability of lumped butter softening. It all shot me out of my body and connected me with the happiness of the world. All of it pulled me to the work table, my eyes fixated on Anna's hands as they skillfully rolled, banged, squeezed, pulled, filled, opened, closed, and otherwise dominated the dough. My eyes rolled with envious intrigue. Anna's short stature was only slightly taller than my boyish height, but that disparity was just enough to sediment her superiority. From atop her temporally administered advantage, she looked down pleasantly, as if to say, "You're welcome for your amusement." She ticked on and let me watch, not a word shared by either of us. Suddenly, the glass door banged against the old bells affixed to its hinge, their cheap pot metal exterior celebrating the new arrival. It was my father. My first thought after my eye's initial glance was that I had to have done something wrong. I remember the deepest pit within my stomach opening. My gut asked, "Surely you can't be this happy for this long, right?" I hunched over and breathed heavily, my father taking it as a respectful bow. He came over and kissed my head, a warmth rarely portrayed by him, and a reception almost never endeavored by me. My tense chest released its grip as I registered the care of the kiss. Rising from my messy head of hair, my father asked Anna how the store was going. She immediately lied, telling him how the store had been moving fast and fully selling. She was the baker and the cashier in the mornings, making little by way of AM tips. For that reason, she liked business slow and steady, letting her milk the morning's slow streaming. After her misleading yes, Anna smiled and winked at me. With my amazement building, her duplicity gripped me. It was as if she felt no fear, guilt, or even trepidation in dancing with sin. All her beguiling complexity was densely wrapped into that simple smile, exclusively offered to me. I was her little chosen one. My father thanked her and sat at the till, whistling along to the soft movements of morning all around him. After some time, the dough machine's minor gear struck its final blow against the major gear's bent-up tooth, and the machine halted. My father swiveled around on his seat and, like a hound set on a convict, walked undeviatingly over to the machine. Anna followed close behind, and then I opened my little gate. Rearwards and excited I was. They lifted the dough to the table and sectioned it into 2 large bowls, slightly differentiated by diameter. The oily bowls lay full of dough for some time. Both my father and Anna moved off to become parts of different happenings about the shop, but I locked in, wonderfully fixated on the hot, yeasty masses. Watching them rise, my mind ran about, great temptation rolling through me. I quickly became lost in desire for the exuded taste of the final product. After the perplexingly patient part of me had almost completely died off, the timer bitterly beeped. I hoped my torture was over, screaming, "Hey, it's time to fry!" Only the proofing was complete, though. Anna laughed subtly as my father stared at me with joviality in his eyes. They uncovered the bowls, removed their contents, and sectioned out the dough, my father's odd dough-minimizing technique already lost on my little logic machine. My father used his heavy hands to roll each piece of dough into large, clean globs, and Anna pressed them into circular sheets. After the laborious beginnings ended, the circles were ready to receive their delicious centers. The traditional single-berry filling of the Popumski donut was switched out for a double filling of blueberry and cherry, my father's special twist. My 2 superiors then scooped the fillings into the big circles Anna had rolled out. Cherry for my father, and blueberry for my chief of mischief. Not only did their succinct enacted accuracy fascinate the last of me, but the red and blue dueling centers burst additionally through me with unknowable vibrancy, my glossy eyes reflecting only 1/10 of a millionth of the almost food's gorgeousness. As if engaged in a beautiful dance, my father and Anna laid the next pieces of round-cut dough over the tops of each construction. Mounds of bountiful dough discs were then squeezed together at their seams and rolled into spheres. With cavorting excellence, Anna and my father rolled up just about all the dough. After watching my fancy grow into desire as they rolled the last of the balls, Anna asked my father if I could roll one. My father smiled at me, the smile reflected in my convivial eyes. His smile then quickly changed to a chuckle as he threw me a disc.
I took 10 minutes to craft that sphere, their combined observance resting heavily on me. I finally finished, and was first to the fryer. Anna guided my hand as I dropped my creation into its bubbling birther, 4 other masses following by her hand. The portly pot bubbled on as I looked between the misty oil-clouded donut and my father's neutral face, prepared to falter into either a shower of approval or castigation. I questioned if I, of all the creatures of this world, could actually be the one to finally press happiness out of my pained paternal huskman. I further wondered if such an excretion was even possible. As Anna pulled the donut from the fryer, I reached for the hot bowl, ready for the ensuing burnt fingertips. My father, angered, slapped my hand away. Obviously, thought my little mind. After the first wave of donuts had finally cooled, along with my hand, my father picked me up and gifted my grip-hungry fist with the powdered sugar duster. I covered all the beautiful balls with saccharine snow, doubling up the covering over my own creation. After the dusting was done, my father put me down and handed me my donut. My face glowed with pride at the perfect little sphere. Right there, in that flour-hazed bakery, I was free from myself, full of something greater. Everything was me, and I everything. It was all I had wanted for so long. As I delicately grasped the ball and raised it to my lips, we all grew completely quiet, our expectant collective emotionality ready to roar. I bit the sweet sphere right in half. With my mouth swelling with sensation, and my slightly wet eyes widening, I thrust my hand upwards and erected my glorious creation. My pride actually overflowed for a moment or two, until my father pierced my perfected revelry and looked down at the treat. At that point of piqued pride, he looked at the half-bowl and broke me open. "Son," he said softly, "you were close, but the donut filling must be separate. Take less time in closing the form. Less rolling time will help to keep things from mixing." He looked at my bemused and disappointed face. "Good first try, son," he said with recognition as his clear intent. Like some star's brilliant beginning, my light intensified. It was such a beautiful and pure piece of time. It was like all the things I had dreamed of had come true for a flash moment. My father's guiding, helping, and loving of me was so pure in that moment. I couldn't help but cry. I was finally important enough to help navigate. I wished that those couple of seconds could be between us forever, stretched into lifetimes. I rushed over and hugged him, knocking the donut from my hand and onto the floor. At the recollective bounce of the sweet ball upon the imagined bakery floor, I snapped out from my daydream, realizing that my mind's surreptitious voice had taken over my memorial retelling. My writing had almost completely stopped. I smiled sweetly into the dimly lit room, tears reiterating their constant, expellant desire. I had always told myself that my father's life had meant nothing. In that room, at that instant, though, I was his son, and that was enough for me, admitted or not. "His son!" I exulted, with my reminiscence ripe with ready anguish. I had repeated my own message of inescapably horrible lineage so often that I had come to believe it. I had simultaneously convinced and convicted myself of our combined ineffectual existence. As the recoil of my recognition of our tiny good time spent together within that bakery lovingly thrashed its way through me, my nihilistic hate faded. For a couple of eternalized seconds, I realized my pervasive improper estimation of virtue. It was narcissism incarnate, inwards, out thinking. That exact, clear, and poignant realization shattered me. It was all there for me. The truth about us always had been. It had been too awful for me to accept before or even shortly after his death, but it remained. We both meant so much, but I had preferred to pretend to mean nothing at all than to accept that our terrible lives could have been for something. In truth, I had actualized and let flourish both ideas concurrently, but at different levels of abstraction and scales of time. My heart had broken as a result and a cause. I had wanted to be free from my own vulnerability, without honesty. In that dark room, with my red eyes burning with virtue, I finally drank it all in, my last shreds of victimhood stripped from my existence. I was here to be, not to suffer or to enjoy, but to bring light out from the darkness, something out from nothingness. Our combined actions and inactions, our dancing duel, could never be extinguished. I understood it all in one great wave. I climbed back into my bed, and love embraced me. A gentle smile grew across my face. As my tears' trails desiccated, and my smile's superbness rooted itself firmly into my heart, I fell into repose. The warm sunlight lightly stroked my face, stoking my soul's gladness and showering me with the golden aura of truth. With fission running through my body, I rested and remembered. My perspective permanently changed. My heart no longer lusted for faulty goodness, only for truth. I had done and been a lot, and it was my time to accept it all as it was, as I was, unmanipulated and true. As thoughtful clusters of memories gushed into my unbarricaded mind, I had a sudden vision of travel. It was a calling I had never experienced before, an inescapably present need to journey into the spirit realm. I couldn't believe my own unlocked bravery. For years I had been rather intrigued by my self-foretold pressing reckoning of psychedelics, feeling prescient but holding trepidations. That night, though, after relinquishing much of my hatred, I felt that I was finally ready to not only accept the truth, but to be totally submerged within it. Almost immediately after my inaudible decision, I felt as though I knew the adventure ahead of me, paved with blood and tears. I knew my time was up. It was out of my control, and that was the best part of it all. I could no longer crush my decisive drive for truth. That much I knew. "There's nothing else left for me but this," whispered my insides. I knew with everything in me that my life was about to return to me, unrelentingly true. That night marked the beginning of my conscious movement towards the feathered arms of the shaman, the inglorious zealot who prescribed to me my antidote. This concludes Chapter 1, Part 4 of In the Darkness I See by Anon Y.